Day 244 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzy here, and today is another day's update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine today. And as always, I'll start off with some of the Russian military losses as of the last 24 hours, so up to the 25th of October there. And in the last day, there has been an additional 500 or so Russian military personnel losses. Now, in terms of hardware, it's actually been quite a big day. So, armored combat vehicles, an additional 26, tanks, a whopping 21, one artillery, and an aircraft, and 3 choppers as well. And I'll get into that soon too. So what we'll do is we'll start out back on the map page here. And we'll start just outside of the Ukraine border, again as we sometimes do, where some type of explosive device was detonated at a railway in the Bryansk Oblast region of Russia, just north of Ukraine and east of Belarus. And I don't think this one just spontaneously combusted. It is in fact a crucial railroad point between Belarus and Russia. And based on the picture, it doesn't look like a distance strike either. Maybe a local partisan that wants to slow down the Russian war efforts, for instance. Purely speculation there, though. Then we'll move across quickly to a nearby oblast, so the Belgorod Oblast, that really borders with Kharkiv for the most part there, where we continue to see blackouts in Belgorod after all of the recent damage inflicted on its own energy infrastructure. Some of which was actually self-inflicted, like a few weeks back when one of the Russian missiles fizzled out over the thermal energy plant in Belgorod and landed there with an explosion. Then we'll move across down to the Donbas area, where the Ukrainian armed forces have actually liberated a few settlements in the last 24-hour reporting period. Now there's 2 changes in one day and you can see it there, so it's quite a decent little southwestern Luhansk region area of liberation, depending on, might need to zoom out for that. And again, just for the record, red stands for Russian occupied, grey is undetermined, fighting ongoing, blue is recently liberated within the last 2 weeks, and green is liberated 2 weeks or longer ago. And nearby in the Svatove direction here, so we're being told that fighting continues across the whole front line, all along here. So the Ukrainian forces have really set their sights on Svatove. No surprises there. At the same time, the Russian forces are really digging in their heels. It's not the Wagner or the Wagner militia group or anyone here, so this will be taken probably long before Bakhmut, in my opinion, where a lot of the most intense fighting is occurring by the most well-trained Ukrainian armed forces on the west, and at the same time the best trained Russian forces, which aren't even Russian forces. They are the militia or group, the Wagner group there, who don't really even fight for a cause. They fight for cash. But at the moment in this area as well, near Bakhmut, no side wants to give up an inch of territory today. Apart from the Ukrainians pushing the Russian forces back in the previous 48 hours to the M3 highway there. Although nearby, just south of it, there has been some clarifications in terms of land, so let's see what that looks like. There we go. So in the last day, there's less contested space, you can say, there on a number of settlements. And also near these front lines in the east, the Ukrainian forces took out a Russian BM-27 Uragan rocket launcher. Now, these things are notoriously low accuracy. They launch a whole barrage of rockets nearly all at once, about up to 8 or 16 at a time, although they only have a range of about 20 miles or 32 kilometers. It's kind of a spray and pray tactic, and certainly one of the main Russian weapons of choice on the front line. Oh, and nearby there was a big fire at Yuvalin near Luhansk. There we go. So if we were to zoom in right here, Yuvalin, we can see, it should be, there we go. Yeah, that's right. I've seen this before. So a location with its fair share of railway infrastructure when you zoom in there as well. Always a high priority target for the Ukrainian forces in the least. And also, interestingly, on these front lines for the Ukrainian crews of the M777 howitzers, now the crews that handle these howitzers seem to have the option to stay in the same spot for days now, because Russian counter-battery fire has fallen to nearly zero due to the HIMARS effect, as they say. Basically, Russian ammo for these weapons are constantly being blown up at ammo dumps, but also the Russian counter-battery radars used to determine where the howitzers and the artillery fire, the M777 fire, for instance, is located at, are getting hit by Ukraine as well. So the Ukrainian forces now have a bit more flexibility to not have to shoot and scoot as much as they previously needed to. Then we'll move across down the map a bit, and another day, another barrage of shelling in Nikopol from the Russian occupied side on the south side here. Typically from many of these regions, not the least of which is the Enerhoda nuclear power plant that Russia uses as a shield. I know, dick move. Now, the vast majority of locals have fled the area in Nikopol. And destruction like this has got to be a head-scratcher for the Ukrainian locals previously in Nikopol, considering how Russian propaganda has clearly stated multiple times that Russia was here to liberate. Doesn't look like liberation. Then, not too far away, in the occupied city of Melitopol in Zaporizhia, there it is, hiding down there, where a Russian propaganda outlet was blown up, no doubt by some Ukrainian partisans, which is yet another example of the Ukrainians in these Russian-occupied regions that are just not on board with really anything regarding their occupiers. Then we'll move across a little bit westerly to the Kherson region. Now, we still have lots happening in Kherson, but it's not accurately reflected in these maps yet. Partially why I'm here, but fingers crossed we'll see some physical map changes shortly. But all in all, the Ukrainian armed forces have liberated over 90 settlements in the Kherson Oblast now. And we also have the Ukrainian armed forces, they took out an anti-aircraft missile system named the OZA. Now, I feel like it's almost 2 or 3 anti-aircraft missile systems a week taken out now, or some version of a surface-to-air missile systems, aka a SAM. And any air defense system is not cheap for it to be taken out in terms of monetary cost for sure, but also military strategy costs as well, because you can't see the battlefield as much when you don't have the radar systems to support that visual functionality. And although, having said all that, this one is quite old. It was developed in the Soviet 60s, but hey, a win is still a win. And I've got to say, this is also a great example of what happens when Russia's more modern equipment is destroyed. They just start using older, less advanced equipment. Which means, well, meanwhile, Ukraine and NATO together are advancing slowly but surely, reaching and surpassing technological parity, militarily speaking, with Russia. And maybe a very simple way to put that is it's a war of attrition, technologically. Oh, and also, would you believe it? Yet another Russian chopper down today. Down at roughly the same location and at the same time as a chopper that was downed about a day and a half ago at the Berislav district here. And it was a Ka-52 Alligator, just the same, and exterminated by just a shoulder-held manpad system, which doesn't have fantastic range, these things. So it must have been pretty close to the front line, this Russian chopper, as always. Now, the front line does look different to what you can see here. I think just yesterday I made a very simple example of what it appears the front line might actually now look like. It's kind of like drawing here. I'm not the best at that. But yeah, it's getting squashed down and encircled more and more. So this may be even less than here, may be where the Russian forces are, as they seem to slowly but surely be withdrawing from this region in the most part. But the thing is, these Russian choppers are still flying too close to the front line. And at $18 million a pop, this is some extremely expensive scrap metal. And it's unexpected because the Ka-52 Alligator chopper, this Russian chopper, is considered to be such a formidable war aircraft or chopper as well, or was before about 6 months ago. And this is where it gets interesting. Something else. So there was also a Russian base in Kherson, that was hit by a Ukrainian HIMARS strike. And to add to that, Russian forces in this region here are continuing to now set up defensive lines on the other side of the Dnipro River. So it's hard to do this with the ruler, but let's just say we've got the Russian forces here setting up their lines and the Ukrainian forces just on the opposite side there, about there to there, let's just say approximately. Thus, what we have here now is artillery battle exchanges from both sides of the river, which does not sound like an advancing Russian military at all. Then we'll move across to some news for the day. Some of it's pretty interesting, I'd think. So a Russian independent media news outlet called Mediazona has said that a marriage boom has occurred very recently in Russia, way above average, which also appears to indicate that Russia is mobilizing nearly 500,000 men as of mid-October, 492,000 to be precise. This amount of men, which have likely been conscripted now, might help explain the thought process behind this marriage boom. Basically, if a Russian man is married, then dies in war, his wife will get some fairly decent level of monetary compensation. And other related reports suggest that Russia is still undergoing mobilization efforts, even though they said they'd stopped and finished at the 300,000 mark about a week or two ago. It's called covert mobilization, which they have to do it this way, if I'm to be honest. If Russia was to keep outwardly and publicly mobilizing conscripts for war, there would be a public outcry that only got bigger and bigger. But I have a sneaky, suspicious feeling that Russians will figure all of this out anyway about these additional mobilizations well beyond the 300,000 amount in this modern day of interconnected networking that we have. And then in some other news, the Red Cross is collecting support for military personnel and for the families of the mobilized Russian soldiers. Now, at a glance, I thought, oh, that's nice. The Red Cross is helping out. But after a second, it clicked with me, because that means the Red Cross is actually supporting the Russian war effort. Even this Red Cross website graphic right here specifically says in Russian on the left, working to support the mobilized military personnel. That's right, the Red Cross. It turns out it's a complicated situation because there's separate international establishments for the Red Cross, but either way, doesn't it just rub you the wrong way? It just doesn't feel right is all. And then in some other news, President Steinmeier of Germany has visited Ukraine for the first time since the beginning of the war, in a move that's seen as very symbolic in support of Ukraine. Steinmeier's role as German president is also a fairly symbolic one with no real power, in comparison to the German Chancellor, which is our funny man, Chancellor Scholz. In some other Russian propaganda style news, we have a photo of Russian politician Medvedev. So he's visiting a tank factory in Russia here. Medvedev could be considered one of Putin's right-hand men. In fact, he was the president of Russia in 2008 to 2012, sort of hot swapping seats with Putin. And this leather trench coat is really just some Gestapo-inspired fashion right there. I wonder if he's at the T-62 upgrade tank plant that I reported on a couple of weeks ago, which was Russia's recent attempt to get hundreds of old 1960s era tanks back into service. One day they'll give up. Oh, and this next piece of news, I believe, is an important one. So in this photo, which is heavily doing the rounds on the internet right now, it effectively shows here a picture of the missile crew that determine the coordinates and shoot the missiles out. So the quote-unquote high-precision modern Russian missiles that land in Ukraine, somewhere in Ukraine. There's other images posting each and every one of these individuals' names here as well. And maybe, just maybe, this is a part of what we need. Illumination of these missile strike technicians, the ones actually pushing the buttons, to have them see their own faces plastered all over the internet and their names on an international criminals of war list. So they'll think twice before they just haphazardly decide to target a missile nearby a kid's playground or a residential building. And in a bit of a lighter news or funny to round off the day with, so we've got a photo here of single Russian mums who don't receive child support from the father of their children are actually now, they've got a great idea. They're calling up the Russian mobilization officers to prioritizing sending these men to the front lines of the war. And in fact, some mobilization officers have actually folded to the pressure as well. So it's similar to the marriage story I mentioned above earlier. And Russian conscripts' monthly earning in these cases will in part go to the mothers and children. And upon the death of the Russian soldier, if or when, right, there's an additional benefit for the family there as well. So yeah, go put them to work, mums. Last place those guys probably want to be, on the old front lines. Okay, I'm going to keep it at that today, guys. Always a smidge shorter at the start of the week. But yeah, thanks for watching. Please leave a comment, subscribe, hit that like button, and I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers.